High in the mountains of Italy, surrounded by silence and mist, a man knelt in prayer. His body was frail, his clothes worn, yet his soul burned with a fire that could not be contained. That man was Saint Francis of Assisi, and in that moment, something beyond comprehension took place. He received the stigmata, the very wounds of Jesus Christ, a sign that his union with God had reached its highest point. It happened in the year 1224, 2 years before his death. Francis was already known throughout Europe as a man of peace, humility, and total devotion to Christ. He had renounced wealth, fame, and comfort to live in poverty and serve others. But now, nearing the end of his life, he longed for something deeper, to share, not only in the love of Christ, but in his suffering. He withdrew to Mount La Verna, a remote and rugged place given to him by a nobleman for solitude and prayer. The mountain was covered in dense forest, full of caves and wild cliffs. Francis saw it as the perfect place to be alone with God. There, with a few companions, he built a small cell and devoted himself to fasting, silence, and contemplation. He prayed with tears, begging God to allow him to experience the fullness of Christ's passion, not out of pride, but out of love. He wanted to feel, in his own body, something of what Jesus had felt on the cross, so that he could love him more deeply. Then, one morning, while praying on the mountainside, something extraordinary happened. As Francis lifted his eyes to heaven, he saw a light descending from the sky. It grew brighter until he could see within it the figure of a man nailed to a cross. But unlike any vision he had ever seen, this man had the wings of a seraph, one of the highest angels. The crucified seraph hovered before him, radiant and filled with love. The sight pierced Francis's soul with both immense joy and unbearable pain. It was as if divine fire entered his heart. He felt the wounds of Christ's passion, not only in his spirit, but in his very flesh. When the vision faded, Francis looked down and saw that his hands and feet were marked. The wounds were deep, shaped like nails, from which blood flowed. In his side, there was also an open wound, like the one inflicted on Christ by the spear. The pain was real, yet so was the peace. Witnesses later said that Francis carried those wounds with profound reverence and humility, hiding them whenever possible. He saw them not as a glory, but as a gift, a burden of love given by God. He did not boast of them, he wept over them. His companions noticed that something had changed. His clothes were stained with blood, and his movements were slower, yet his face shone with an otherworldly light. When they finally saw the wounds, they were struck with awe and fear. They knew they were standing before a man who had touched the mystery of the cross. For the next 2 years, Francis carried those wounds until his death. They caused him great suffering, but he never complained. He said they were a sign of Christ's mercy, not of his own holiness. To him, they were reminders that love is proven through sacrifice. The stigmata of Saint Francis were the first recorded in church history. Later saints, like Padre Pio and Saint Catherine of Siena, would bear similar marks, but Francis was the first to be visibly conformed to the crucified Christ in this way. The meaning of this event is both beautiful and terrifying. It shows that holiness is not about escaping suffering, but about transforming it through love. Francis did not seek pain for its own sake. He sought union. The wounds were not punishments, but the seal of a soul that had surrendered completely. In a world that runs from pain and chases comfort, the stigmata remind us that the deepest joy often hides behind a cross, the love that bleeds, the love that saves. When Saint Francis descended from Mount La Verna, he was no longer the same. The mountain had become a new Calvary. His body carried what his soul had always desired, the image of the crucified Christ. Even as his health failed, his heart was filled with peace. He called death his sister, welcoming it as the final gift that would unite him completely with God. Today, pilgrims still visit Mount La Verna, where the small chapel of the Stigmata stands. The mountain remains silent, as if guarding the memory of that encounter between heaven and earth. The same wind that once touched Francis's face still whispers through the trees, telling of a love that left marks deeper than any wound. The story of the stigmata is not just about a miracle, it is about what happens when love reaches its highest form, when faith no longer asks for signs or rewards, but only to be one with the beloved. Saint Francis of Assisi reminds us that the closer we draw to Christ, the more our hearts resemble His. The goal of faith is not admiration, but imitation. And for Francis, that imitation became complete when his body bore the same marks as his Savior's. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that suffering can become sacred when it is embraced with love. And if you want to hear more stories of how the saints reflected the light of heaven in their lives, subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover more moments when God touched the world through His friends.